Hello, listeners. Welcome to another episode of Reckless a Talk, our TTRPG interview show where we sit down with some of our favorite writers, players, GMs, and streamers to get to know a little bit more about what makes them who they are. I am, as always, your host, GM Nathan, and this week I was lucky enough to sit down with P Vincent, owner of Tablecat Games and creator of the recent Savage Worlds setting, Street Wolves. PV started in the space right around the time we did and has been a really lovely person to get to know and see grow. I really liked them, and then I got a hold of his flavorful, dramatic, synthwave, retrofuturistic work with Street Wolves, and, well, I really, really liked that too. We touch on so much in this interview: enforcing vibes, Miami Vice, chasing the fun, what synthwave actually is, more about Miami Vice. But I think this interview is really special because it gives a really thoughtful look at genre game design, one of my favorite kinds of game design, and an inspirational look at dreaming big and doing the work required to make that happen. As always, links to Street Wolves, PV's socials, and other things discussed in the episode are in the show notes. And now, here's this week's Reckless a Talk. See you next time. Why, hello, PV.
Hello. Am I allowed to speak right now?
You are, yes. Oh, yes. Sorry, we didn't clear that in the pre-show banter.
All
Is
right.
that there's no like secret gateway that you need to pass
I don't
through.
want to speak too soon. I don't want to get yelled at.
So yeah, some podcasts are very like, don't say anything until we've introduced you officially. But no, I just start screaming at you, and
All
then
right.
you're expected to start screaming back, and then that's the format for the next like hour plus. So already off to a great start, in my opinion.
Love it.
But hello, so excited to
Hello.
have you here.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
So, for the listeners at home who are unfamiliar with you and your work, could you please introduce yourself, who you are, what you do, your pronouns, all that good stuff?
All right. I'm Paul or PV or Vincent, Paul Vincent. I've never really settled on an actual first name within the TTRPG sphere, but you could call me any combo in there. My pronouns he, him. Most people probably know me from Tablecats Games Twitter. I'm also on other social media, and I've been in a few APs, but it's mostly just me blabbing on Twitter all day. So
What? Someone blabbing on Twitter all day? That is
I'm
an
not
experience I'm not at all familiar with.
right, and I'm not on it as much as I used to be because now I'm trying to spread the the love around the social media, so like Tumblr and all that kind of stuff, but I'm still on Twitter quite a bit. It's a hard habit to break.
Yeah, it is truly insidious in the ways that it burrows into one's brain. But well, I'm not going to say we're not here to talk about Twitter, because who knows, we might still talk about Twitter, but we're primarily here to not talk about Twitter. We're here to talk about tabletop role-playing games, including your very excellent product, Street Wolves, which dropped, what was it, like a couple weeks ago as of
Couple
this
weeks ago.
recording.
Yeah, feels like years ago now, but yeah, time becomes this weird thing, the older you get, where it's just like days get longer or shorter or whatever, so
Well, and especially you've been working on Street Wolves for so long, ever since I was aware of you, have been, kind of like at least tangentially working towards Street Wolves. So I'd imagine it's kind of a surreal experience to finally have it out in the world.
it was about 2 or 3 years,
Yeah,
depending
wow.
on when you count the start. It actually was from a project that I killed many years before that. So you could say that I've been working on it like 5 to 10 years
Sheesh.
almost, but a solid 2, 3 for really, taking over my life. And, it was one of those things where a lot of other creators, they make smaller things
Yep.
and you'd see them releasing these things and I'm still on this thing and it's just, oh, I can't wait to finish this. And finally it came out and now I can actually, I feel like now I can call myself a creator because I have something out there.
Yeah, it is.
Right.
It is. There's something existing. You are not just creating. You have created publicly.
Created. Yeah.
Yes.
I think
Well,
the
well,
past tense is important there.
well. I at least like internally,
Yeah.
like in the
Right.
mind and the heart, is like, well, I have one thing out there, and that's pretty fucking cool.
Yeah.
But we'll get to your very flavorful, excellent neon noir, savage world setting slash game, Street Wolves, a little bit later on. We gotta back it up. We gotta back it up just a bit, and by a bit, I mean some quite amount of time. Because what is a story without a good origin story behind it? How did you get involved and introduced to tabletop role playing games?
So I am kind of a late bloomer in a way because I grew up in a really small town where there weren't that many nerds. There wasn't hardly anybody playing Dungeons and Dragons, and forget any other game, right?
Yeah.
Like, I know that I'm not a big D&D guy, but it's like that's it. If there's not Dungeons and Dragons, there's probably not other things. And I wanted to get into a group, but nobody really was playing it. But my love was Star Wars. It was a big, big, big Star Wars and GI Joe stuff. But like Star Wars is always my number one love. And it's hard to imagine out there, kids, but there was a period where there was a Star Wars drought from the end of
Yep.
Return of the Jedi to about like the mid 90s. There was almost nothing. And there was a company called West End Games that published a Star Wars role playing game. And what was great about those books is it had all this background and lore and all this stuff that you didn't get from the movies. And there's a lot of stuff that actually came from that role playing game that kind of became a part of Star Wars. But I got those books even though I didn't really play.
You were
And
just thirsty for Star Wars content.
oh, I was so thirsty.
Yeah. That you're like, cool, this has an X-wing on it, so
Yeah.
therefore I should probably own it.
Right. There was probably a period of time where I bought everything Star Wars because they made almost nothing,
Yeah.
you know? But would absorb those books. And I tried playing it a couple times with a couple friends, but it didn't really work because I think we discount now how hard it is to get into a role playing game if you live in a vacuum.
Yes.
Like there's so many concepts where it's just like
Yes.
you can read in the book, but unless somebody is there to kind of help it guide you a little bit, like now there's YouTube videos and stuff.
Right.
But back then it was just like, am I doing this right? I don't think so. It's not really working, you know?
It feels
And
very weird, and
yeah,
feeling weird might mean that I'm doing it wrong, and what do I do with that information?
totally. And I was the GM and I didn't know all the rules, so it freaked me out that when somebody tried to do something and I just felt all this pressure. So I kind of gave that dream up. And then after college, I started working at a Half Price Books
Oh, cool.
in
Yeah.
Milwaukee. Yeah. And one of the managers I was friendly with, he said, "Do you want to play Star Wars role playing game?" And I was like, "Oh my God."
You have no idea what you just said to me and
Right.
how meaningful that is.
And so then we went around and, we kind of recruited some other people and we ended up playing in a game that lasted a few years. It
Wow.
was weekly and we had these stories and it was the West End Games version too. But that's how I really got into playing it. And then for a while I, ran it and I got in a couple D&D games. So it was kind of like sporadic for a while after that cuz that group ended up dying as all good groups eventually do. Um but I got into running my own stuff, and it's not because necessarily I'm a forever GM. It's mostly because I like doing it.
Yeah.
But uh, I ran Star Wars Saga Edition. I ran Delta Green. And I don't, if you want to get into the history of Street Wolves or whatever, it
That's I
kind of,
mean, that's gonna be a large portion of the interview, so most certainly.
I don't know when you want me to unleash
Got
the
it, got it. Yeah, yeah,
secrets,
yeah.
right? But I'll just say that there was that point where I wanted to play GI Joe as a role playing game. There was no GI Joe role playing game. There is now. But at the time there wasn't. And so I took those Star Wars rules and I made a GI Joe game out of it, and I actually ended up playing that for a long time with some friends, and that eventually morphed into Street Wolves.
Oh,
So
cool.
yeah, and so you can, if you look at Street Wolves, which you should buy,
Which you should look at. You
which
should look at
you
Street
should
Wolves.
look, you shouldn't pirate it. You should buy it. No,
Yeah.
um, if you look at Street Wolves and you kind of like look at some of the things that are in the lore, you can definitely see the GI Joe stuff. So it's still there. It's more like it's in a world where GI Joe existed and then went away, and now there's these guys, the
That
Street
makes
Wolves.
sense.
So
And that is especially interesting to me. There's like, now that you say that, there is one particular image from the book that is extremely GI Joe in my brain now, where it's like, oh yeah, there's the GI Joe. That's the GI Joe one. It's the one of the person with like a machine gun walking through an arcade,
yeah,
with like these huge cool sunglasses and like, like pushed up hair, buzz cut kind of thing. It's like, oh yeah, that's GI Joe vibes, at least for me as a peon. Other than, hey, this is Star Wars, and so that's cool. What part of like playing and or running tabletop games, as divorced from like writing tabletop games, like what grabbed you? Like what was the part that for you was really interesting and made you hungry to keep playing, to keep running, and then eventually to keep creating?
I would say that it would have to be that I always was sort of a, I guess I was a writer, but I just didn't like publish anything, right?
Yeah, totally.
And I wrote stories all the time, that kind of stuff, and then I just kind of stopped. And then I realized that, I could write stories for my friends, and
Mhm.
and I was a little bit too railroady. I'll admit it. Like, it took me a while to get past that.
Yep. Everyone has been there, I think, or at least lots have.
But the core was that I could create this framework without having to write all the dialogue and stuff, because that's the worst part in the descriptions, right? I would kind of create this framework, and then my friends would go through it and fill it out, and we would
Yeah.
all tell the story together. And it was a much more dynamic way to get that writing
Mhm.
desire out, and it was a small table of people rather than selling a book to like 1,000 people, or whatever. But it got that desire out of me, or like I kind of got
Yeah.
that enjoyment from writing, and then playing with people and hanging out and all that kind of stuff.
So in like, I have to bop around, because once I start talking about like types of stories and genres and whatever, then that immediately is just gonna suck into Street Wolves conversation, which is then what
Okay.
we're just going to talk about for a while. So you're running, kind of like you're starting to homebrew a GI Joe system. You're starting to kind of get involved in design and stuff. When does the kernel of an idea of not just that I want to run GI Joe and have rules for GI Joe, but I want to maybe do something more robust with it, whatever it ends up being? Obviously, it ended up being Street Wolves, but was there like a point where it kind of clicked for you of like, this, what if other people want this?
I think it was mostly that I wanted to be able to share the stories that I wrote, so basically the
Hmm.
adventures. And the best way to do that would be, okay, well, if I make this GI Joe game, which was called Operation, or sorry, it started as Operation, then I had to change it because there's a video game that's Operation Wolf. But it was Special Mission Force Wolf Pack. And if you know Street Wolves at all, like Wolf
Hmm.
Pack's the major faction of the good guys. But it was Special Mission Force Wolf Pack, and I thought, well, if people got this, then I could have the adventures for it out too, and then they could enjoy them. So it was kind of like the stealth way to get my adventures into the
Yeah,
world,
yeah. Just it only requires 150, pages of work,
Yeah,
and
before
then
you
you can
get to
start
the.
releasing adventures. Easy.
Mhm. So you can tell I really thought a lot about this kind of stuff. Um, but and then of course I had to file all the serial numbers off because I didn't want to get sued.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, it's just that desire to get those stories out there.
And so, did it change to Street Wolves before you kind of decided, oh, I want to have this maybe be a real thing? Like, were you already kind of trending in that direction beforehand, or was it a like, I want to start putting stuff out for people to enjoy, so I guess I should really make it less GI Joe than it is right now?
It it basically died before it got to that point because I had
Yeah.
wrote a lot of the book. I wrote a ton of it. Actually, I had a launch party for Street Wolves that people were in the Discord, and I scrolled through and I'm like, look at my shame here, everyone. This is the book that ever came out. But it kind of died, and I just fell out of love with it. And I think it's because it wasn't unique enough.
Yeah.
Right. Like if I think about it enough, it was like wasn't its own thing enough to make me want to keep going. And so when it died, I was like, okay, I guess that dream's over. I didn't really know what to do after that point. And I kind of bumbled along with making some system agnostic stuff that maybe I'll release someday now that I've actually made something.
Yeah, done a thing.
But when the pandemic happened, and it's still happening, unfortunately, but when it started, I kind of had all this extra time because I didn't have a commute anymore and all, I wasn't going to my parents as much. I couldn't visit friends, but I had all this extra time in it. So I thought, you know what, I should go back to it. And I had remembered that when we quit playing Wolfpack, I had actually started an adventure where the GI Joes had gone to Miami because it took place in the 80s, and they met Crockett and Tubbs from it's as corny as crap, but they actually met, Crockett and Tubbs from Miami Vice, and they were working a Vice case, and the players really responded well to that. And so when I went back to the whole project, that was the fun thing. Why don't I look at doing that more?
Mm.
So
Mm-hmm.
that kind of skewed the path away from, okay, it's this military
Right.
thing to like this other thing. And if we want to get in a little bit, because I was going to Savage Worlds, another big reason was somebody had already done G.I. Joe and Savage Worlds.
Yeah.
So,
Very reasonable.
can't do it. So, what is the unique angle? I like that Miami Vice junk. Let's do that.
Yeah. So as we kind of talk a little bit more about Street Wolves specifically, I want to take that step back and first just say that Street Wolves is so full of flavor and vibes, in a good way, where like that's what I want out of a setting, is just vibes and crunchy goodness, but is very steeped, as you've already mentioned, in a lot of genre. It is very Miami Vicey. It is like there is that little bit of like GI Joe, but also there's like a lot of Blade Runner sprinkled in, and there's tons of other stuff. So first in this line of questioning is, what are the kinds of stories, or maybe the better question is, what about the stories that kind of eventually made their way into Street Wolves? What calls to you about them? Like what about Miami Vice do you like? What about Blade Runner is cool to you? Or kind of any of the other, especially kind of very 80s-y things that exist there.
I like the feelings that the protagonists, well, the things they go through, and then the vibes and such. I feel weird. Vibes is like, I'm old, so I say vibes a lot now, but like the aesthetics
Yeah.
of when they go through the ringer, and there's all this emotion, like that Phil Collins is playing in the background, and they have these like serious looks, and the wind's blowing in their hair as they drive down to the docks to get into like a
Absolutely.
confrontation. Just that kind of stuff really gets me going.
Yeah, the
So
over the top, like extreme, like a little tongue in cheek, but also very deadly serious.
yeah, and one thing, about Miami Vice that I loved versus other shows. So, there's two shows I watch a lot of right now that are took place at the same time. There's Miami Vice and a cop show called Hunter. Hunter is like cop that, is does kind of what he wants, and there's a lot of action. He's tough, but Miami Vice had this whole thing where the job is literally destroying the police. So Crockett and Tubbs are being eaten up inside by, you know, just being involved in that world. And, big spoiler for the end of Miami Vice. I always love telling people this, but, if you don't want to know the end, I'm sorry.
Skip forward 30 seconds or so.
The way the series ends is they quit because they realize that there's always going to be another bad guy. They can't make a difference, which is such a weird way to end a series.
Yeah,
Like it
totally.
wasn't, they didn't win, they quit. And that really appealed to me that that there was something so like I don't know what the right word for it would be, like negative or desperate, or just those feelings that the only way out is either through death or quitting, right? Nihilistic. That's the word I'm looking for. And I guess that's one reason why I love, other RPGs. Delta Green is like my favorite RPG to run. Is so brutally nihilistic.
Hmm.
And it's just that feeling of like, being on the edge and the danger of being pulled under, right? You're only just treading the surface.
Hmm. Are you someone, either as a designer, as a consumer, whatever, do you like the Miami Vice ending? Like, do you like that the final moment of a story is that they quit or they die? Like, do you like that, or do you like that there's the threat of that, and then it's kind of like pushing that way, or kind of what's your personal outlook? Because like for me, I'm like, well, of course it could go like that, but they managed to find their own meaning, in the system and blah blah blah, where it like has a hopeful turn, but that's not necessarily everyone's style, especially playing Delta Green, for example.
I guess for me, it's a lot of I like hopeful stories. I don't like when the heroes die and that kind of stuff. But on the other hand, like if we're looking at this particular genre or this type of story, I like it that way where um we're gonna give away more endings. I'm sorry everyone who hasn't seen Drive yet. Have you seen the movie Drive at all?
I haven't, but by all means, go ahead.
It's the ending isn't particularly happy because he can't be with the woman that he fell in love with essentially during the course of the movie, but he does get away and avenge, like, he kills a bunch of people, but it's kind of like it's sad but also sort of hopeful, right?
Yeah.
So he drives away to the next town or whatever. He doesn't get killed at the end. Whatever his life is after this point, we don't know. I wish there was a sequel, but um, it's that kind of thing with this sort of genre where it's not completely dire and hopeless, but it's pretty dark.
Yeah. Pretty dark, I think, is a good a good summation.
Yeah.
Okay, we will take the final step. Can you summarize a little bit as to what Street Wolves is?
Yeah, hang on. Let me find my notes here.
Yeah.
So, okay, here we go. You ready for the pitch? And this is going to be loaded with $5 words. So, Street Wolves is a synthwave inspired neo noir retro futuristic action adventures with the heroes fighting street level battles against the forces of evil lurking under the surface. So that was just too much. I kept
I know.
stumbling on
I've
it. It's
heard
just too
I've heard
much.
you give a similar distillation before using all those $5 words, and
Yeah.
it never gets old. I like hearing just the string of descriptors all at once. But carry on if you'd like. I guess for someone who's not Nathan, if you'd like to break it down a little bit further, I guess that's fine.
So the more simple version is your investigators or problem solvers in a retro rad, moody, altered 1980s.
Hell yeah, there we go.
So
Both good. Both speak to me.
Awesome. Yeah, so basically you know, in Street Wolves, and you can run it however you want. That's the one thing I always tell people is like if you want to go big action, fine, that's at your table. But the way I've tried to go about it and the way I play it is I love slow burn investigations. Like
Hmm.
something's wrong here, figure it out. Maybe you get into a scrape or two, in a bar, and or you find a dead body, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then it kind of builds and builds and builds. And a lot of times in the adventures that I've run, there's a big blowout ending type of thing with combat and whatever. But it doesn't have to be that way. I always kind of have like the safety valve. If players really don't want to do combat, they can get around it.
Hmm.
Um, but generally, that's the way 99% of groups I've ever run anything with is they want to get to that fight at the end or whatever. So I kind of build that. But my favorite part of it is the street level investigations. You don't really know who to trust because the bad guys have kind of infiltrated like law enforcement and politics. Sorry, and so they're kind of on their own. They're usually given a mission. I have this kind of a way to set it up where there's this organization called Wolfpack that kind of gives you these missions, and then you're expected to just do them.
Yeah, it's very
Um,
faction driven kind of setting where like
yeah,
the PCs belong to a faction and there are rival factions, and there's just kind of a lot of like built-in story opportunity and adventure hooks kind of from those relationships for sure.
right. I do have in the book a section that talks about if you want to run it in a different way, where your
Yeah.
heroes are just traveling from town to town, or like A Team, right? Yeah, and I hate comparing Street Wolves to A Team because they're totally different moods, but the setup of you
Yeah.
get this mission from somebody who needs help and then you go help them. So, but without like bosses. So if you want to run it that way, you can do that too. The core theme of it is basically you're struggling against the forces of evil in cities. Usually there's drugs and crime and all kinds of cool stuff. So
All the stuff you want from your 80s noir,
yeah.
kind of procedurally things. So we talked a little bit about kind of the pivoting process away from GI Joe and towards what would become Street Wolves. But was there something as you were, because it's a very particular design. Like it's not just noir, it's not just this property or that property. There's neon, there's little bits of like magic and like powers involved, there's alternate histories. I heard you compare it to like the movie Alien, where it has that kind of like it's in the future, like
Cassette futurism.
cassette futurism, right? um
Yeah.
but was there something, kind of, was there a kind of like core tenet or principle or vibe that as you were looking to really put this together and unify your vision of Street Wolves that you were kind of approaching as you were writing and creating?
No, no.
Right. And that's
No,
a
the funny thing,
reasonable answer.
it's sort of yes, actually. I'll say it. Yes, sort of. Because the thing was is I really leaned into the whole synthwave thing,
Yeah.
and that kind of contains the stuff that I wanted to get at. So,
Yeah.
um, I have this boring thing written out just in case I forgot, but it's the differences between cyberpunk and synthwave, right? Like some people call
Yeah.
Street Wolves cyberpunk, and it's not. That's not what it is. It's they exist on opposite ends of the spectrum,
Mm-hmm.
where in synthwave, um, the danger is it's very nighttime focused and involves
Yep.
strangers and mysteries and discoveries. uh there's like an underlying rot, and that there's the dangers that come from technology. But cyberpunk is that technology is everywhere and it sucks and it's advanced, where I see synthwave, or a particular part of synthwave where that technology is on the rise, right? So that's why
Yeah.
my setting has things like VR and video phones, stuff that's really kind of not harmful yet, but you know, there's corporations and stuff that are working on things that can become dangerous and horrible and all that sort of thing.
Something that I really appreciated that I think piggybacks off of that nicely is the amount of thought that clearly went into the setting itself and kind of the alternate history portions of it and the kind of like mishmash of technology that went into it. Like you said, there'd be like, again, cassette tapes and like arcades, but also video phones, all the way towards, I think it was like 50 years, 40 or 50 years of like alternate history all bullet pointed out to kind of give people an idea of the world that they're running around in, knowing that you had the synthwave aesthetic kind of as the end goal. But how did you work backwards? Did you work forwards? Did you just make calls on what seemed cool at the time, or some combination therein?
So I'm going to sidestep the question just a little bit. I do want to talk about video phones just for a second because I've always
Yeah.
been fascinated with technology that existed but didn't quite take off,
Yeah.
right? And so while I was writing this thing, I was like, oh, I have a reason to talk about it now. I have a reason to put it in. So that's why I put it in. And you might find this interesting because you're from Chicago. When I go to C2E2, are you familiar with C2E2
Oh
at all?
yes.
Convention in Chicago for it's pop culture, but primarily it was supposed to be for comics, but now comics is everything.
Yeah.
Um, if you go to the bathrooms in one of the like the downstairs parts in the convention hall, they have an old video phone.
Yes. I know
It's a
exactly. I
payphone,
can picture it perfectly in my brain, knowing exactly what you're
a
talking about.
video payphone, and I've been obsessed with that thing. I've taken tons of pictures of it. It actually, I think it's still a picture of it might be on the website right now, but um so I love that kind of stuff. And so, you're talking about alternate history. Is like, well, how does that fit into my thing and why did it take off?
Mm-hmm.
Right. As
Yeah.
opposed to the real world that were just fizzled out. And, now we can talk on our computers, but we skipped that step essentially. So that was part of it. But, there's a bunch of reasons for the alternate history and how it was shaped. One reason was, I don't expect people to know the real 1980s. So, you can go into this and kind of looked at that bullet point list, like, oh, okay, there's a thing with Star Wars when they were doing Rogue Squadron where it's set in the Star Wars you remember, not the actual Star Wars.
Got
And
it.
that was like one of my goals was this is set in the 80s, but not the real 80s. So
Yeah.
how do we shape that? Another thing was that I wanted the Soviet Union to be strong. Um, but in the 1980, the tail end, it was getting weaker, and by 91 they were done. Well, I want them to continue beyond that time frame because I have plans for the future. So how do we do that? So we have to explain why it's not completely crumbling. Um, I also want to distance I say ourselves, anybody reading, right? I want to distance from having to be accurate to the time in the era. So I want to pull ourselves away from the real world politics so we can still comment on things. But, I like the Twilight Zone
Yeah.
approach to commenting on politics and issues of the day where it's like, okay, we're not actually talking about Reagan and Reaganomics. We're talking about this other thing, but maybe it's,
But if you
you know,
squint just a little bit,
yeah,
it
you
might look
might start
familiar.
seeing those things. So, it kind of pulls us out of having to be historically accurate, but still having that playground to explore topics in that
Yeah.
era.
More like the you're it sounds like you were designing for the Hollywood 1980s of this is the genre, the vibe of the 80s, but not literally this is not taking place in the United States 1985.
Right. And also, a problem I have too is I'll say Street Wolves takes place in the 80s and then people will instantly think of A Team and the goofiest thing possible. Oh, I want to do this in your game. I want to do this. And I'll say, that's fine at your table, but mine is this 80s. The serious stuff that can get goofy. There's ninjas in my game. I'm not gonna. That's not
Yeah.
silly. That's not. I'm not super serious. I can get goofy, but I don't focus on the weird, silly stuff that's remembered from the 80s. I kind of try to focus on more that gritty talking about neo noir, that kind of 80s vibe. So
So for and this is just I think a good fun question for someone who's put out a setting, but especially since you kind of had to think through all of these genre bits and the semi historical bits, and come up with like a functional setting and game to play in. Where was the line of like too much and enough world building? Like, did you struggle with that balance of kind of like going down rabbit holes and realizing maybe this is not important, maybe actually this is very important and I didn't think about this at all, or like kind of how did you find and navigate that process?
um so I don't know. I don't really know how to answer that exactly, because it's in my mind, it's just kind of this big this big
Yeah.
mess of things. It's just interconnected. I think one of my goals was to make enough for people to base stories on or create adventures without giving them
Yeah.
too much. And you actually, now you actually made me remember this. So when I started, I don't know why I did this. It's such a silly idea. Street Wolves had two phases, and you could pick as a GM, I want to be in phase one or phase two. Phase one is the one that exists now, right? Phase two was later in the 90s, and it had different technology and gear
Yeah.
available.
Yeah.
It had different faction changes. It was too much. And so I think that
You're
goes into
releasing
your.
two settings in one setting, basically.
Exactly. And so that's part of that world building was like, well, these people did this, but in this time they're this. And, and it's just, no, 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 no. Like, the book was huge, and, I've stripped a lot out of it over time, because I, with the setting book, I want it to be just enough without being too much. And then if I want to investigate a little bit more, about this faction's history, this or that, then I can do it in an expansion or in an adventure where, okay, well, we're going to go fight that faction now. What's their deal?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, because there's a whole thing with the cult in the game where I had like their whole history. But I even had like the stats for the cult leader. It's like, no, they're never. This setting should be the street level battles. They're not going to meet that cult leader,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's too advanced.
Or if
So
they are, the GM can figure it out. Don't worry about
exactly,
it.
exactly. That was one thing too. It's just like, okay, you gotta give it control over to those GMs out there.
Yeah.
You don't want to be too up their butts about everything.
Hmm.
So
And something that I thought kind of really stood out to me also, even through my kind of high level like look through and kind of assessment of the book and setting. Obviously I wasn't like playing through it, but there is a good amount of mechanical aesthetic enforcing things, of like there are like technological forces that make everything look synthwave at night, and it's explained, and like that's part of like the world building and like character creation and power set, and I thought that was just wonderful, of like just you know like opening the throttle to kind of this like super intense thing, and you have like a fashion guide of like, hey, here's kind of what I imagined these characters might dress like and look like, to kind of like all feed into it. And there are so many other kind of small examples of you weaving and layering those feelings into the bones of Street Wolves. So was that something that was kind of central to you early? Kind of, I want to make sure that it is like grafted to the bones of this book, or something that you kind of added gradually, or even something you didn't even really think about?
it was something where at first I was making this thing, and then every time I think about it, there's a couple things that would pop up in my mind. It was, how do I make this unique enough to be its own thing, right? To make it
Totally.
different enough that warrants somebody to want to pick it up and not just go, well, I can use the Savage World basic book and then say that things are colored blue or what,
Right. Yeah.
pink or,
Yeah.
but then as I played around with it, then I would have these ideas that would
Hmm.
crop up like, why don't I do that? Why don't, I'd look at a lot of art. I listen to synthwave music, which is this whole thing, but you'd also look at the album covers and stuff and be like, why does that world look like that? Why can't my world look like that?
Yeah.
How do I make that happen in this world? So then then it leads to like, well, there's this weird stuff. Well, where did it come from? Well, the faction did it, so it's just kind of like a domino effect from that original desire to make it unique and then try to emulate the vibes of it.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that again, I think that really I think you did a good job of really of gamifying the setting. Like I feel like a lot of setting books are very just like, I don't know, here's cool world building stuff and like you figure it out. And then there's just mechanics of another game adjacent to it. But it it really struck me as you did a very good intentional job of making decisions of how do I make this like part of the game as opposed to just like a background. So do you have any kind of thoughts, advice, or just kind of like descriptions of mindset, I guess, around, kind of people who are designing their own settings or worlds or whatever, for how to keep the fact that it has to be interactable with by GMs and players in mind?
So I'm a story first
Hmm.
GM, DM. I do adhere to the rules a lot. I'm not like the GM can just go, oh, let's ignore that. I mean, sometimes I do, but
Right.
but I want the story should be the most important thing. So for me, it was a lot of what kind of stories do I want to see in this
Yeah.
and how do I make that happen? So then it's kind of putting all those like little Lego pieces together to, the base, and then we're going to, GM at home can now go, oh, well, we'll put these pieces together this way, but it's all in service of a certain type of story.
Yes.
So, I don't want to add because Savage Worlds has very solid mechanics and I don't want to alter them too much. And I get nervous anytime I do anything mechanically, but there's certain things that I was like, I really need to be able to replicate how this sort of thing happens. It keeps happening, this theme, this sort of story. How does that happen? Well, then I come up with Drive because I look into Savage Worlds has I don't know what the new horror companion has, but in the old horror companion they had Sanity. That's not right for this. So then I made Drive. And Drive is more about how close you are to the edge of becoming a corrupt cop or a hothead or just somebody who's obsessed too much with the job, that kind of stuff.
Right. Losing
So
yourself to the world. Yeah.
right. So that felt right to create those stories like in Miami Vice where Crockett, spoiler for a 40-year-old show now or 30 some year show, Crockett's wife is killed and he loses it and he murders the guy that murdered his wife. Like he doesn't arrest him, he
Right.
goes to the island where this guy's hanging out and just shoots him. And that's kind of rock bottom for a cop, maybe not for an action movie, that happens all the time. John Wick's killing thousands of people, but in this particular type of story, that is his rock bottom, and he actually hits rock bottom a few times. But how do we get that to happen? Well, he hit zero drive, right? That's my reasoning, and so I make that in the setting. So, and I'm not into games where people are torturing other people or I hate like I did run D&D for a little while and my players were torturing a goblin. I said, "Look, this is not the type of game I want to run.
Yeah.
If you want to play the torture game, you play with somebody else, right? This is, you know, so, if you do those kinds of things, that's a drive check. If, And then it was actually pretty close to release. I made this change where anytime you kill somebody, you have to make a drive check, which, role playing games, you're killing people all the time. Who cares? But in this world, you know, violence is nasty and it's not natural. And, if you, and I actually had sessions where, you know, you, in Savage Worlds, you can have exploding dice. And, you just want to hurt somebody a little bit. All of a sudden, your damage goes super high and you've killed them. And, the player plays that really well where they're like, I didn't mean to do that kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that should be reflected in drive too, right? Like if you didn't want that to happen, that really should have an effect on, you know, on what, your morality or whatever, you know? So I don't know if I answered your question,
Oh, absolutely. You're good.
but that's
You're
kind
very
of,
solid.
that's the kind of thinking that goes behind me adding mechanics.
Yeah. So it just I really liked the way you were talking about kind of noticing things in media and saying, hold on, here's a thing, and I should attach, I need to replicate that. So not how do you always watch media, but how do you consume media when it comes to kind of like looking for inspiration and looking for those sorts of insights. Like, is there a particular mindset you get into, or is it just something that kind of like occurs to you um, as you're watching a thing or whatever?
That's kind of hard to say. I think it
Yeah.
might come a little bit from my writing background that I had, even though I wasn't like an author, where, I was also an English major. I have a degree in it. I didn't really do anything with it, but you look at things analytically, right? You're writing papers and, what did this author mean? Or, you know, what are these
Right.
characters doing and all that kind of stuff. There were tons of papers. And so I think now if I'm just watching things I like,
Yeah.
I'll in the back of my mind there's like something going on. It's like, why do I like this? What is happening here? And I make a note about it mentally, right? It might even just be subconsciously. And then over time I really think, I'll start living in that world, I'll think about the thing I really liked and what do I like about it? And that's kind of where I go with it.
Yeah.
um, I'll give a shout out to Morgan Richter, who had a YouTube series. She's an author. She did all of the episodes of Miami Vice. She did this whole series, and so that also helped me digest it too, because she had all this really great commentary on each episode, and it kind of helped put my thoughts into order in a way too. So I'd watch an episode and then quick fire up her YouTube
Mm-hmm.
thing,
Oh, cool.
and like, okay, yeah, that is why that happened, or like
Yeah.
that kind of thing. So that was a part of that for me.
Yeah, for sure. Another thing that also jumped out at me, and I think we had been kind of dancing around it a little bit when you said that like this is a world where violence is not natural, right? Where being here costs something. Doing this work again, Miami Vice is kind of the like a nice touchstone, but you're kind of members of like a pseudo an organization as opposed to like a police force or whatever.
Yeah, I didn't want
Um,
to do cops
Right,
because
right. I wanted
yeah,
to make that like
problematic.
super clear because it is not a cop, like not a cop thing. But knowing that it's a setting and knowing of course that each GM and table are going to make it their own thing and tell their own stories and find their own meanings in it. While you were writing it, was there kind of a thesis of Street Wolves, of the setting, or several obviously, where it's like kind of an essential element of whatever stories are going to be told in the Street Wolf setting? You baked it in kind of at a base level because of how genre-y it is and how tied to that kind of very specific feel that you worked to make it have.
I'll say sort of,
Yeah.
because the main reinforcing thing is the vibes, right? That we're talking about vibes.
Yep.
Without the vibes, Street Wolves wouldn't exist. So essentially every decision I've made is in building the setting is to enforce the vibes. I
Yep.
should have a
Hmm.
shirt that says enforce the vibes. Um,
That's a good one, actually.
that's a good one.
That's really
Oh,
good.
nobody take that.
Yeah, yeah. Dibs,
Um,
dibs, dibs. TM, TM.
um, but somebody on Twitter, I don't know, it was just kind of a weird request. They requested that I describe the setting without using the word synthwave. And I thought it was really weird because it'd be like, could you describe D&D without the word fantasy,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
It's the
Or magic,
formula.
or yeah.
Yeah,
It's like,
exactly.
what are we doing here?
Yeah, so the formula is synthwave plus Miami Vice equals Street Wolves, and it's like, all right, how do we tell these stories? But also, like, I don't want you to think that I'm just ripping off Miami Vice. So we just
Right.
keep using it as a touchdown. But there's all these other things where it's like those things, and then what can I make my thing more unique? Like, so it's its own IP without getting sued by Paramount or whoever owns Miami Vice. So, that's why there's the powers with that is tied into that stuff that makes the cities glow weird. And so there's all these kind of things where I want it to be its own thing. Some people, we talked about Star Wars where they say, I don't know if you ever heard the phrases like make your own Star Wars,
Hmm.
where it's like, this is my Star Wars. How do I make it so it's unique enough where you don't pick up some other RPG book and go, well, this is his thing, but I don't know, maybe there's elves in it. I want it to be its own thing. If you want to play this type of story, then this is the book you pick up.
Hmm. I also wanted to ask, uh, it sounds like the decision to have this be Savage Worlds as the system powering Street Wolves, it sounds like it came pretty early. Was that the case?
So we had the old D6 version, right, that I talked about, which was Wolfpack. And then the thing is I am not super, and I briefly mentioned that, like, I get nervous when I make mechanics because
Yeah.
I'm not the mechanics guy. I'm the story guy. So I didn't want to make something from scratch. It just wasn't really appealing to me. So I started looking around at other systems. And when I fell upon Savage Worlds, it felt really right for
Hmm.
this, particularly because it does have some similarities with um, the West End Games Open D6. It's not a D6 system, but just the way the skills are used, and there's just certain kind of the wounds, the way there's no HP, no health points or anything like that. So there's just certain things that just felt enough like it without the flaws
Yeah.
of the other thing. And then I started looking at their licensing, and it's pretty good for third parties. I got the Ace license, which is their top tier third party license. And I don't want to bore anybody with like all the details of what that means, but you can sell with an Ace license. You can sell it wherever you want, however I want. I could do a Kickstarter, I could do print run. They don't care. The only time they take any kind of cash out of your pocket is through drive-through RPG sales. They take a little bit, they skim a little off the top, which is fine.
Get a little
Um,
kickback.
but I could sell it wherever I want otherwise, and I can use your logo,
Nice.
and other fans are more aware of my thing. Um, that's not to say I am very much open to either someday making its own thing, or maybe finding another system and then having like another, if you don't like Savage Worlds, maybe you'll like the blah blah blah
You'll have
version.
you'll have many ways to play
Hopefully,
Street
yeah.
Wolves. Yeah, yeah.
But that's kind of on the back burner right now, but yeah, so it did kind of come like early in the revision of the
Yeah,
whole thing.
right.
So yeah.
So doing a setting slash game is a large project.
Yeah.
It's not a hopefully a controversial thing to say.
Mhm.
And I think we were talking a little bit beforehand, so I'm not 100% sure. Was this your first quote unquote like product in the TTRPG space?
Yes. I would not recommend this to other people to do this. It's ridiculous.
Well, so it is it again it is it's 100 and I think 60 some pages or thereabouts, uh but that doesn't include the adventures, the character sheets, the player, quick start rules, and all the supplementary stuff, and being on Twitter and all the things. So I guess kind of first and foremost, were there points where it felt like a little too much, where the work got a little intimidating, or you were at a part where I don't like doing this part of the work, but I know it needs to be in my book? Was that something you encountered, especially over the long kind of development cycle that you had?
So I'll just step back a little bit. So
Yeah.
even though this was my first thing that I finished and is out there, you know, I did have, like I said, I've written adventures. And when I say like I've written adventures, I was very verbose. A lot of people, you make little bullet points. No, I'm writing whole paragraphs and adventures that only I will see, right? So I had that down, and I had some cards from my Star Wars players that I designed that had a little picture that was all visual. So I did things just
Yeah.
for my table.
Yeah.
So I feel like, I kind of got some of that experience in, but I still remain that, or still say that, don't make a setting as your first actual release. It's just crazy. Um, I think for me, what kept me going was so I've always had a hard time finishing projects. We talked about all the things that I haven't done. But two things that happened in my life, which I think are critical towards success in this. One is, it's gonna may sound a little silly, but my girlfriend was one day just said, "I want to learn how to ride a motorcycle. I want to get my learner's permit. Do you want to do it with me?" And I'm Mr. Anxiety, but I've always kind of had an interest in that because my dad rides or rode motorcycles,
Hmm.
and so you know what? I said, "Yes, I'll do it." I went, did the course, and I learned how, and I was like, "Yeah, I can do this thing," right? Like it was this big confidence builder. And this is in my 30s, right? Like I'll say a late bloomer. Then later on she says, "Well, I used to do this martial art called Kobudo. I can't even pronounce it right now.
Yeah.
Kobudo."
Used to do a martial art.
Yeah. So my girlfriend says, "I used to do this martial art and I want to go back to it. Do you want to go with me?" And since I had already done the motorcycle thing, I was like, "Fine, I will break out of my comfort zone. I'll go to a class. I'll dress up in the gi. And, some people thinks it looks silly. You watch The Office or whatever. Adults taking martial arts, whatever. But it was extremely important in my personal development because I stuck with it, and I eventually got a black belt.
Oh, cool.
And
Congratulations.
thank you very much. I love to brag about it, but no, it was one of those things where I I stuck to it. I did it. Went to the classes. I learned. I
Yeah.
got better. Um, it was all about the focus. It's like the reasons why you take little kids to martial arts. These are the things you want them to learn. But it's never too late. If anybody's interested in taking a martial art, I say go for it, because it really helped me. So after that, it was like I had this goal, right?
Hmm.
And it is gonna happen. And so, hell or high water, I'm writing Street Wolves. I'm doing it. I'm never gonna stop. I'm not gonna stop. Um, then part of that too was I start talking about it. Right? I'm on Twitter. I'm gonna make this thing. Everyone look at me. Look at me. I want to make this thing.
I mean, yeah, yeah.
Look
So
at me.
no judgment here. That's all I do for like 12 hours a day is,
Yeah.
hey, look at me. I'm
Yeah.
making this thing.
And so, I mean, if you want to get into this whole thing and you don't want to say, "Look at me," it's going to be a lot harder.
At
Anyway,
least in terms of getting people to actually, you can still make the thing, but
yeah,
getting people to consume the thing, there
it's
might
going
be
to
a
be
barrier.
tough.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm on Twitter saying, "Look at me." So now I have shame. If I don't do it, I'm going to be ashamed, right? Because I've talked about it so much. So in a way, I made myself accountable, right?
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
do
That's
this.
that's the psychologically more healthy way of saying I brought all this shame upon myself.
Yeah, I
I
would
held myself accountable. Yes.
potential shame.
Yes.
So I
Exactly.
work in potential shame. No, I made myself accountable by saying to everyone, I'm gonna do this. Hey, this thing is coming, blah, 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 blah. So it there wasn't ever a point where I was stopping
Yeah.
or feeling like I was gonna stop. The main issue I had was, "Oh my god, this is taking forever," right? I thought it would take a year. It is now 2 years. It's 2 years plus, like, so that was the issue, where it'll get done. I just am in agony because, um, with any kind of big project, right? You reach that whatever that 80 or 90% of it,
Yeah.
but then you're stuck in that remaining portion for a really long time. And that was one of my problems. It was just like, oh, I have the layout done, but it's taking months and months and months to complete.
So there are many things that go into a book.
Yeah.
There's layout, there's marketing, there's like art direction, which again, you have some really excellent art in your book. Were there things that either A, you kind of surprised yourself as like, oh, I really enjoyed that, or I'm really good at this, or B, that you had to just like punch your way through and or get someone to help you through, being the one man kind of creation team that you are?
Yeah. So I think so I have had a lot of help. It's one of those things where it's like I don't want to say that you know, uh, Table Cat Games is one person because I've had so much good advice,
Yeah.
so much people boosting me. No man is an island or whatever the phrase is, because I've had so much help. But 90% of the actual work comes from me writing or doing the design and all that kind of stuff. I think doing the book layout is kinda tough for me because I'm new to it, and I'm not always
Right.
happy with the results.
Yeah.
Like, people tell me it looks good, but I'm really picky. I So I'm a web designer in real life. That's my real life job. Um, and I kinda equate it to this where, for a long time, I thought my stuff was okay, and there was just something missing about it. And then after a certain point where you do it enough, you feel like, "Oh, okay, I can do this now. I feel good about it." And so with the layout stuff, the graphic design, I'm still kinda in that stage where, I'm not sure if this is really working for me. I
Mhm.
want this to be better." So, I think that's the toughest part. Um, I don't like I'm not I don't like making marketing graphics as much. I feel it takes me a long time to do that, but you have to have a bunch of different things to try to get people's attention.
Yep.
And I don't like um thinking about taxes.
No, yeah, that's also that's
That's
fair. That's, yeah,
like
not probably anyone's ideal place to be.
I get the like I formed an LLC because I just wanted some sort of protections in case I did
Yep,
make a
totally.
mistake or something. And it just that dealing with that and the Wisconsin, you're supposed to pay sales tax on like everything, and
Oh
it's just
yeah.
ugh. So this last year's taxes, this is probably really boring for anybody listening, but this last year's taxes aren't going to be too bad because I didn't sell anything really, right? But like now that the book's out, it feels like the Grim Reaper is at
It's
my door.
looming. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
right, totally. So that's something you don't really think about when you go into. I just want to,
Yeah.
I'm all dedicated to making this thing, and then there's all this other work out there that you're making for yourself.
Yeah, I always find it interesting, both for me personally, and I think just to hear from other people of the work that is not doing the work. Of like the work is writing a book, but you also have to form an LLC and figure out taxes, and you have to do marketing and like
Yeah.
layout and design and that kind of stuff. That it goes well beyond. Well, no, but I'm writing a book, and that's what I'm doing. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the supplementary stuff that you've put out, and I know that are hoping to put out for Street Wolves. Most of all, I really did want to talk to you about the Jumpstart rules, like a rules light version, or kind of like a vibes and rules version of Street Wolves, to kind of, oh, I almost said chum the waters, and I don't feel super comfortable with that
No,
particular
I look
phrase.
at all my customers as hungry sharks just wanting blood.
Right, exactly. So can you talk a little bit about the decision to release that, what went into it, and kind of what it was met with?
Well, it was one of those things where, at first I kind of had this mindset. It's just like this capitalist mindset where it's like, I don't want to do anything for free, right? I
Yeah.
just give me money. But because I mean, you got to think about it, all this work you're putting into it. It feels weird to put something out there for free.
Yeah.
But, you know, when you look around Savage Worlds, it's pretty common for there to be a free jumpstart, quick start type thing. And so if everyone else is doing it, it's like I should do this too. The other reason why I did it was I'm pretty pragmatic about having, usually when I do something now, it's for a reward later. So uh working on building a mailing list, right? It's so I can market to people and let them know what I have stored later on, right? Like I worked on that for like
Hmm.
over a year, and then Twitter starts falling apart. It's like, geez, I'm sure glad I started working on a marketing list. But as far as the jumpstart goes, I was just saying that I'm not super confident in my layout abilities, right? But as a web designer, sometimes developer ish, uh, I look at it like I want to build reusable components, right? Like in a program, you build pieces and then you just reuse them over and over. And with the layout, well, if I work on this jump start, then I can know what the headers look
Yeah.
like and what a sidebar looks like and what. So I I was able to build all that stuff, and it did feel bad because I did feel like I was taking a step back because you stop the forward momentum on the actual book to build this mini book, but it ends up saving you time in the long run because you've kind of worked out what a table looks like, what this is going to look like, and you can just reuse it. You can copy paste it, right? And I ended up changing it. I've updated it a couple times, but overall, it's basically what became of the full book. I think you asked how was it received?
Yeah, or just kind of, yeah, and like a little bit about the, like, yeah, the strategy behind it, and whether it was a good strategy ultimately.
It was pretty well received. I wouldn't not do it again. It's pretty essential, right? Because if Street Wolves is my first release, right, and I've got nothing out there, and I release this book, and there's no sample, then how do you know it's any good, right? You
Yeah.
might see a couple extra pages. So, and also it gave me that experience of putting something up on drive through and putting something on my site. So it was a really, really good exercise. And as far as people like it, they seem to really enjoy it. I've had a lot of good feedback on it. Um, that as far as like what kind of kept me going, just you hear these nice things, and okay, I'm gonna keep working on this thing because people like this thing.
Yeah.
Um, I haven't really it feels weird though because it's had about 900 downloads
Wow.
total.
Awesome.
Thank you. I don't know if that's good or not, but
See, it is all, no one knows any numbers in this business, right? It is all just like
yeah.
guesswork. 900 feels like a good number to me, and I hope it also feels like a good number to you.
Well, I kind of am coming from a small town, going back to the
Right.
beginning of that's more than my town's population when I was
Wow.
growing up. So if everyone had a copy, that's a lot, right? Um,
That's pretty good.
yeah. So, uh, you know, I haven't really heard much outside of my sphere of influence, right? Like, um, it seems like most people that are into it are in contact with me, right? So, which is cool. Like, I like talking to people about it. I love answering questions. I like helping them with whatever. But I've only seen a couple things outside of it where X person might have said something here, or like there's a blog post. And I don't like looking looking for that kind of stuff because
Yeah,
like you hear about the movie director that Googles themselves or whatever. I don't do that because I don't want to find bad
yeah.
trash talk
I
about
get that.
me.
I get that very deeply.
So if you come to me and we're talking about it, like, you're this is great. I don't need to go looking for your blog post or something.
This will be the official call to action: is if you have a nice thing to say about Street Wolves, just reach out.
Yeah, just reach out. It'll
Just
be
say
really
something.
cool, man.
It's awesome. Whether or not you know P Vincent already, or whether it's a total stranger, just do
Yeah.
it. It'll be great.
But
It's
if
always
you
a good thing.
Yes, totally. But if you hate it, that's fine. Just keep it to yourself. I
Yeah,
don't
you
need
don't
to
need that.
know.
No one
I
needs that.
don't need to know.
You can, write it in like a Word document and really vent it, and then delete
Yeah.
it. And then, wow, congratulations. We all move on with our day a little bit more positively. So,
Well, sorry, I need to interrupt. So there is actually one thing that I do get nervous about because, like, we're talking about like how I get nervous about mechanics. I do get a little bit of a vibe that there's certain and Savage Worlds players that are pretty into like the optimized choices. So, and because I'm story first, they might look at my edges or whatever and be like, "Oh, why would anybody pick that?" Or "That's only circumstantial," or
yeah,
that kind of thing, which totally understandable. And they might be turned off to certain things because I'm a more of a story person,
right.
right? So that I like that's one reason why I don't really look out there so much because it's like I don't really need to see somebody tearing apart my choices of edges.
Yeah, you've done the thing. You've designed it the way you wanted to design it. You don't need to hear anyone saying, "I wouldn't design it that way." It's like, well, good news. You're not me.
And you're probably in the same camp, I would guess, where if you're at your table and you're looking at something in a book and you like a lot of it, but you don't like some of it, you could change it, right?
Yeah, easy,
Who cares, right?
easy.
You don't have to be like, oh, this a +2, that doesn't make sense. Well, fine, at your table, make it a +1,
Yeah,
right? I
whatever you
don't
want to do.
care,
It's easy. No worries. I don't
right?
need to know that.
Yeah,
At least not in a mean way. Yeah,
yeah,
whatever. Um,
exactly.
so before I talk about kind of your future, Street Wolf's future, all that good stuff, how does it feel to now, after years of work, be someone who has an entire book out?
It's Okay, so I try. You might ask this later, like about my outlook at life, but it's a little bittersweet because on the one hand, it's out there,
Yeah.
but on the other hand, it's like, oof, I really would like it to be a printed book. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
you achieve this big thing, and you immediately the new
Yes.
goal is set, and
Yeah.
so that's what one thing that's hard for me. And then also another thing, like, if we're talking about numbers or whatever, um, sales have slowed down because, it's out or whatever. And it's like, I'm a little less than where I'd want to be, you know, but it's fine. I'm just going to keep plugging away, making great stuff. I have to get the word out there, right? Like that's
Always.
essentially
Yep.
it. It's like, you know, like I said, my sphere of influence, right? Those people have heard about it and they've liked it and they bought it and they may be enjoying it, but it's like we gotta get it out there more for other people to enjoy it too. So it's probably going to be a little bit of a jog or a marathon, right? It's going to be a
Yes.
marathon probably rather than
Yes.
like an instant hit or whatever. But it did
Such
pretty,
as indie tabletop role playing game, or really an indie DIY anything, is a
yeah,
lot of like, just keep screaming about it, I guess.
yeah, totally. And so, and that's the thing is like I have all these plans for it, and I'm gonna keep at it. And we could talk about stuff I'm working on with it, but it's like I want to keep supporting it because the people that learn about it later on, they might go, oh well, here it is, and then there's all these other things too, and if they really like it, then it's all available,
Yep.
right? So
And more fresh things to market and to
yeah,
yada yada. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. So what are your hopes and dreams kind of with Street Wolves in the tabletop space, all that kind of stuff?
Well, I want a print edition of the
Yeah.
book. I need it. Like
Of course,
it's
I would too. I would have absolutely already spent a silly amount of money at like a Kinko's or whatever to like get a weird bound version that's kind of
version,
shitty.
yeah.
So yeah, I understand
I've
that
been
very
tempted
deeply.
to do that myself, but so I want a print version that so if we're talking about future plans, I'm going to do a Kickstarter for that in the
Cool.
future. The bare minimum would be to get the book done, but then like stretch goals would be like more art, because the art, I'm very satisfied with the stock art I
Good.
found,
Quality
and
art.
I love the art that the artist made. I want more of what they can do, right? Not just what
Yes.
I'm recoloring in Photoshop or whatever. So, I'm really hoping to get a print version with more custom art. Um, like what my hopes and dreams basically is, I I don't need to live off of table cat games, but
Yeah.
I would like it to be a thing where I can think, I want to make this thing. I'm going to hire this artist to do the cover and not freak out about how I'm going to pay for that,
Yeah.
right?
At least have enough coming in to immediately reinvest it and not have to
Yeah,
worry so much about it. Yeah.
right. Because in the, proofreaders and
Yeah.
editors, they're well worth every penny, but it's just like, if I'm only going to sell 25 copies of this adventure, I can't afford an editor and an artist, right?
Yep.
And I think
Totally.
this is, and we're not going to get into it too much, but the struggle with AI art is like why it's so tempting for people. It's because it's like, oh, I want really good art, but I can't afford it. um my strategy is, what can I do with stock art and
Yeah.
that sort of
Which is
stuff.
again, and you do a really fantastic job of putting that very seamlessly into all the design and that kind of stuff. So again, it's a very cool and good looking book.
Thank you. That's what I hope for, because it was a lot of looking for the right pieces and then recoloring them or editing, photo bashing them somehow to get
Yep.
them to work for my thing. Which you'd be surprised. There's not a lot of stock art out there for a synthwave, retro, futuristic, 1980s, blah blah
May
blah blah
surprise
blah.
you to learn. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. It's not like you can just search for that and then find a bunch of pictures that'll work.
Are you finally going to be able to put out some adventures for
Yeah,
the
that
setting as you wanted to originally?
forget the core book. Who cares? This is all about the adventures. No,
Yeah.
yeah. So I have a brief pause right now where I'm working on a non-Street Wolves thing,
Ooh.
but it's going to be a real small Kickstarter to basically fund, like I just said, the editor and potentially some art, for this dark fantasy thing that's basically a
Cool.
lasers and feelings hack. But um, remember, I had said earlier that oh, this is for future stuff. Is like I want to do this small Kickstarter to get experience for the Street Wolves Kickstarter.
Yep.
So I have a lot of attention on this game, the Wicked Forever King Hungers.
Yes.
So, and it's gonna be fun. It's probably about 2 pages or whatever, maybe three, because I can't help myself. But
I think I read on the tweet that it was a one-ish page
yeah, I like to
tabletop
say
role playing
ish a
game.
lot because I'm not gonna hold myself down to anything.
Yeah.
But for adventures for Street Wolves right now, I have most of it written, but it's a it's kind of a different thing where in Street Wolves a lot of it's in cities and there's more action and whatnot. In this is a small town and it's real gritty and dark and more of kind of a horror thing, a little bit. Um, but I'm working on this adventure, and Megan Caves of Gone Rogue Entertainment is working on it with me, and primarily she's going to be doing some audio components of it. Um, so the idea is you kind of get prompts via audio as you
Oh, cool.
play. So
Yeah.
like the audio is like clues or whatever. I don't want to spoil too much because I've got to test it and
Yeah,
everything. But
totally. Yeah, right. It's still a work in progress, but
yeah,
baseline. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, that sounds
yeah,
really cool.
I'm really excited to work with her. She's awesome. So that's the first. Well, that's the first adventure. And then there's a plot point campaign in the future. It's a Savage Worlds thing where it's kind of like a structure that's, like you pick up Storm King's Thunder or whatever for D&D. It's like huge and it's got all this stuff. The Savage Worlds campaigns like that are usually a lot leaner, that have a lot more ability to be flexible. But I have a friend that's going to be working on the first plot point campaign, and I'm excited about that. And then I got some other stuff for that too. But
many irons in the fire is the point. There's
yeah,
more content from
and
Tablecast Studios.
right, and then after these are done, I'd like to do Street Wolves Malibu, which is more. It's fun in the sun. It's a little bit lighter, and then it advances the plot line to like the early '90s, like I was
Cool.
saying.
Awesome.
Yeah. So that's the phase 2.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Coming back around. No work is wasted work.
Right. If you cut it out of a Word doc and put it in another Word doc, you can always go back to the original.
And then you just have made 2 Word documents. Isn't that pretty cool? The last question that I had kind of for you, and this is something that I especially wanted to talk to you, because you talk a lot about the collaboration you've received from other people, the advice that you've received from other people. You are very active, kind of like publicly and kind of behind the screens in terms of just talking to people and networking and kind of being an active participant in the sphere, so to speak. So, do you have any kind of like creative, and especially for someone who does a lot of like genre work, for Street Wolves, are there any particular creative types, TTRPG or otherwise, that you kind of particularly admire or have learned a lot from as a creator?
No.
Go. Okay, easy. All right. Well, now on to the lightning round.
No. So the list would be like crazy long, and I'm gonna leave people off. I'm gonna feel really, really bad about it.
Yep,
But
totally.
so I'll say that my artist friend, Jurassic Todd, he's great to talk to, run things by. He's not really in the sphere so
Right.
much, so forget him.
Again, it's creatives generally.
Okay, all right, all right.
Yes, and I've learned a lot from the creator of Miami
Yeah,
Vice. Like that,
yeah.
it's a blanket question.
Michael Mann, thank you. But so then also Jason Ho, who was originally the art director advisor guy. He was awesome. I said I wouldn't bring him up in this. We have this running joke that I give him too much credit, but I brought him up so he can suck it. I'd also like to point out that as far as Savage Worlds go, the creator of Titan Effect and the creators of Battle Lords, they're really awesome. So check their stuff out because they're super supportive. They've been supportive of me the whole time. And, I can look at what they've done within the Savage Worlds thing and then, steal their ideas, what are good things that they've done, and then I can do them. And as far as, just in general, I have to give a huge shout out to Cassie Mothwin. Super talented.
Friend of the show, Cassie Mothwin.
Powerhouse, literally a house of power.
Yes.
She's super fun to talk to.
That should be her new fucking Twitter handle.
House
of Power Mothman. That's sick as hell.
I like it. Yeah, but super supportive person, beyond generous with her time and support. Talking about stealing people's ideas, is she's done what I've wanted to do ahead of me, like release the games, done a crowdfunding. So, it's a kind of, I think she formed the LLC before me. So it's like, I'm a step behind, like, and I can ask her advice.
As an example. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, she's great. And I also want to shout out to Carrie Smith of Crossroads.
Friend of the show.
Yeah, great person, great friend. Still has me on APs, although I'm a terrible actor. I don't understand it, but I love her energy and what she's doing. And she started about the same time as me too. So it's just like, we've all kind of got this like thing. We're all growing together, and even though she's in the AP world, I want to see her succeed, and I try to plug her stuff as much as possible, right? Because they've got something really cool going on over there.
They did a playthrough, right, of on the channel.
They did Street Wolves. Yeah, I
I'll put a
guess
link
maybe,
in
I
the
should.
I'll put a link in the description for anyone who is interested in checking that out.
Yeah, and actually Cassie's in that one, because,
Oh yeah, that's
like I
true.
said, we're all working together. We all know each other from when we all kind of started at the same time. It's kind of like these links, and I for if you join the mailing list for Street Wolves, there's a plug. If you join the mailing list for Street Wolves, you get a code to get the character that Cassie played in the Crossroads
Oh,
playthrough.
cool.
So it's kind of like a big circle, but
Well, I'll
yeah.
also be sure to include the link to joining the mailing list also in the episode description, and as well as
Okay,
all the
sorry.
other links anyone could ever want.
I feel so bad. I just keep pushing this whole Street
No,
Wolves thing on everybody here.
no, you're that's again, it's going to be in the title of the episode. It's all
All
good.
right. Well, buy it.
Yeah. PV, it is now time.
Oh no.
Yeah, no, that's correct. That's the correct reaction. For the Reckless to Talk lightning round, wherein I ask you a series of questions, the exact same questions that I have asked every single guest to have ever been on this show. And there is no wrong answer. The only wrong answer is one, I guess, that you lie about. But even then, I don't know, make it an entertaining lie. It can be short. It can be as little as one word. It can be a whole 5 minute long spiel. It can also be, I don't really have a good answer for that. All of them lovely and valid. There is, again, no time limit. It is as you deem appropriate. Are you ready for the Reckless to Talk lightning round?
Oof, I think so. I'm sweating bullets right now.
Again, you should be. That is a correct response. Question 1. Is your glass half full or half empty?
Okay, so I'll say that it's half empty, but I've worked hard on trying to change my perspective.
Ooh. What excites you creatively, spiritually, and or emotionally?
I think seeing others being excited by a thing. So,
Mhm.
if I can make a thing and people are excited about it, I love that. If I can give them an answer, or if they're happy because I was able to help them in some way, if I can give somebody joy somehow, I guess that is the return that I like, is
Mhm.
the joy that they feel. I get it.
What does not excite you creatively, spiritually, and or emotionally?
I mean, taxes.
No
It's
wrong
hard to,
answers.
yeah, it's just, there's a lot of things, but I'll just say that for now. That's the easiest one and the most on my mind.
Yeah, fair. What is your favorite sound?
I really dig rain. It's a big one for me.
Mhm.
Yeah.
What sound do you hate?
I have two. Can I say two?
Of
Am I
course,
allowed?
it is
All right.
your space.
I hate the sound of children screaming their heads off. So
Mhm.
it drives me crazy. And I live across from a school, so I hear it a lot.
Mm.
And then the other thing I hate is cars honking outside on the street, like honk, 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 like constantly. That drives me batty.
What's your favorite word?
Okay, so I don't really have one, but what's funny is you ask me that now, and I have this moment where the word diarrhea comes up just because it
Mm.
makes me laugh. It's
Mhm.
if somebody said, like, I was just watching
There's
Curb
no
Your
judgment here.
Enthusiasm. Yeah, thank you. I was just watching Curb and somebody said I have diarrhea. I laugh so hard even though it's the worst thing to have, but don't
What
put
is
me
your
on record for that. Don't.
but I did not put you on record for it.
Oh,
You
no.
put
Oh,
yourself
no.
on record for it,
Oh,
unfortunately.
no.
And now we have to move on, for this is indeed obviously high stakes, high intensity lightning round. What is your least favorite word?
Okay, I really don't have one. I can't think of, some
Mhm.
people say moist, but I'm fine with moist.
Yeah, doesn't do anything
So,
for me either.
yeah.
What tabletop role playing game, monster or antagonist, interpret that as you will, have you not faced or run that you would love to? And it can be a trope, it can be a monster, it can be whatever that means to you.
Um, so I don't really play D&D that much. I know the thing is kind of more generic for me, but I there's certain monsters, like what is the one that's like a terrorist?
Tarask?
Yeah, that seems cool to me. So
Just a
there's like
giant,
or
unstoppable
or a
kaiju.
beholder. Like I've never faced some of the most iconic
Yeah, totally.
things. So, in my time playing, it's like, oh, like they still kind of have this mystique for me where, oh boy, that would be neat to
Totally.
fight that thing. Yeah.
What is your favorite adventure of all time? Similarly, it can be a tabletop role playing game one. It can be one you wrote, one you played in, one you watched, or it could be just an adventure story. Indiana Jones, 1999's classic The Mummy, etc., whatever it means to you.
I'll say life. No,
Oh,
sorry, that's a pretentious answer. Um, I really loved running Delta Green's
hmm,
Impossible Landscapes.
yeah.
It was took months and it was so intricate and it had all these things that the players like it didn't mean anything to them at the time, but then months later it does, and it became this like it got into their heads. So, if you have any interest in Delta Green, it's a really, really cool
Y-
adventure.
Yep, it is supposed to be a legendarily good adventure.
Yeah, it's great. Great stuff.
What is your favorite tabletop role playing game character of all time? Similarly, it can be one you played with, one that was an NPC, one you watched on an actual play, whatever.
See, that's tough. I like a lot. So because I was such a Star Wars kid, that the Star Wars adventures that I've played with my
Hmm.
friends, like there's so many of them that are like my favorites because of that. I think one that I still have like I kind of carry a torch for
Hmm.
is my character Teague, because he was this pilot and it was really fun, and I had to work really hard to get an X-wing. And, I actually won a race. Like I had a GM that was very, it's going to take a long time to get anything, right? So I
Yeah.
had to earn all this stuff. And by the time I got all this stuff, I built my own R2 unit, right? From nothing. Like I had pieces and I
Hmm.
built it. So that character means a lot to me because he was my first character too. And then the group died, and it's like, so that's the one that I still think about. Like, what is
The one
he?
that got away.
But I when I was running my own games, I did put him in as an NPC. So
Next. He lives. He lives.
well, he lives on. Yeah.
Final question. What gives you hope?
That's a tough one. I just think that things will turn around. I feel like the future can be brighter. Maybe it's the half empty, half glass type of trying to flip it around type of thing. But yeah, I just have this like inner belief that I have hope that things will be better.
Hmm. Well, P. Vincent, congratulations. You have run the not just the lightning round gauntlet, but also the entirety of the reckless attack gauntlet. Congratulations.
Oof.
As your reward, could you please remind everyone who you are, how to support your work, where to find you, all the good stuff?
Okay, so I'm P Vincent, whatever you want to call me. Table Cat Games, that's probably the best one to use. You can find me pretty much anywhere there's internet, social media site as Table Cat Games or some variation on that. You can go to the website tablecatgames.com as like the home base. Um, Ideally, if you want to sign up for the mailing list, that'd be real cool. You'd be
Link
like
in
my
the episode description.
Yes, like I said this the other day. I wish I could give every person that joins the mailing list a nice pat on the head because they deserve it. Um, but yeah, like pretty much everything's there. And I just try to share what's coming up, and I try to boost other people. So if you want to follow me and see like recommendations for other cool folks and other cool projects, I try to hit that RT button as much as possible, or Tumblr. I try to reblog. So
All available in the show notes. P. Vincent, thank you so very much for being here. It was a delight
thank you.
and
You're a
appreciate it.
delight.
No, this is about you. I do not
Okay.
accept your compliments.
All right, then I
Thank
then I
you.
take it back.
Well, then I take it back.
Oh no.
Thanks for coming.
Bye.
Bye.